Today on Public Research.
I mean, it's incredible to me to watch all these, post-2024 Democratic recriminations from, the abundance crowd, where they're like, why couldn't we run, a not particularly woke, plain-spoken white man who wants to address bread and butter economic issues in like a populist way and like take on the oligarchy. And I'm like, every single one of you was like a woke Hillary liberal back in 2016 when we were doing exactly what you're saying, and you all made fun of us, demonized us, called us racist and sexist. Now you've pivoted to being more anti-woke than we are as a sort of like, hyper overreaction to getting everything wrong. I mean, meanwhile, Bernie has been saying the same things in the same way for basically his entire life. They're vindicated, but he's really old right now.
The Nation's David Klion on why Kamala lost, crafting an expansive agenda for the Democratic Party in the age of AI, and a discussion of Gaza, October 7th, Israel, Zionism, the War of 1948, and questions of genocide. All that and more on today's episode of Public Research. I wanted to start in an area I think we agree a lot on, maybe, which is about the Democratic Party. What went wrong in the last election and where the party should go. I'll just give you a nice, juicy softball. Why do you think Kamala lost?
There are a lot of reasons, but I think any fair assessment has to start with Joe Biden and the myriad ways that he was an unsuitable president, that he and the Democrats lost the faith of the country with what was essentially a cover-up of his senility, as best as we can tell, or apparent senility. And I think, even if you're going to blame Harris for some specific things, and I can blame her for some specific things, even there, it's downstream of the fact that Joe Biden picked her to be his running mate, which he absolutely did not have to do in 2020. And clearly did so despite having no faith in her and his people having no faith in her, such that they were undermining her constantly, right up into when he decided not to run again, according to recent reporting. So given all that, I am actually not that hard on Kamala Harris. I mean, I think she had some basic deficiencies as a candidate, and I will identify some specific things I object to that she did as a candidate, which won't be terribly surprising. But I really do think it all comes down to Joe Biden. I think that Joe Biden should not have been the leader of the Democratic Party in 2020 and beyond. I think that given that he was, the honorable thing to do would have been to not announce he wasn't running again after the midterms and have a proper open primary called for, which, to be honest, Harris probably would have won, but at least people would have felt like at least she would have been battle tested or something. And I think he's ultimately responsible for her being the runner-up anyway, or his replacement anyway. So that's, as far as Harris and what I can criticize, I actually do think it was quite close, shockingly close for the mandate that they've then claimed, which I think is now to an extent blowing up in their faces, although unfortunately there's no way to get rid of them. That said, I was openly disgusted by the decision not to let Palestinians speak at the Democratic National Convention. I don't know that we can prove definitively that it cost them the election, but there's a plausible case that at least cost them Michigan. And it certainly, I think just morally it was a terrible thing to do, and speaks to a wider problem with the Democratic Party right now. Hugging Liz Cheney clearly did them no good. Though I think people overstate how much a problem that was. I don't think Tim Walz was the wrong choice. I'm publicly on, I wrote a much circulated piece attacking in advance the idea of Josh Shapiro. So,
and you were right. It's come out in the books. He didn't want he didn't want to be VP. He really didn't want
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
I have a number of issues with him. I mean, don't get me started on the whole knife incident, which I think would have been a major problem. I think the Republicans were salivating about that, and they will if he runs for president next time. But for any issues I could raise with Kamala's campaign, I honestly think she did about as well as she reasonably could have, given what had just happened, and given that she is Kamala Harris, a not particularly impressive politician. And I think that the real problems are with Joe Biden and his lack of mental acuity and the various selfish decisions he made.
Yeah, I think you're obviously right about Biden. I'm much harsher on Kamala though than you. I mean,
I'm not saying I love her. I'm just saying
she was really like the opportunity economy. What the hell? It's just
No, I mean, it was
yeah.
all, I mean, it's also really unfortunate. I mean, I tend to buy into the argument, which I think, the Matt Iglesias crowd disagrees with, that they had some real momentum when, they were kind of loose and exciting and Tim Walz could go off script and then they were reined in by a campaign apparatus that was Biden's campaign apparatus, which had spent the last, year and a half systematically preparing for a catastrophic loss and covering up their guy. And I think that, with the extremely limited time they had to pull a campaign together, they deferred to those people and it did not serve them well.
Now, do you see any lessons from the loss? I mean, forward-looking lessons about, okay, 2028, here's what we should learn about what we should be presenting to the American people.
I mean, some of it, some of the problems, I think, go beyond the candidate, either Biden or Harris. Some of them are just unfortunate cyclical problems. I mean, the obvious one and the most dispiriting one being inflation, and the reality that, the Biden economic comeback, which was exaggerated by its partisans and was not felt evenly at all. And I think we have to be sympathetic to many voters who didn't feel it was serving them. But that said, inflation turns out to be a huge political problem. And, I don't want to say Larry Summers was right because I was very much on the other side of that fight and I stand by it. But inflation is, in fact, a huge political problem, one that we basically hadn't dealt with since the 70s. And I think that we've had to learn that lesson again the hard way, that voters, you can tell them wages are going up. You can tell them that unemployment's never been lower. You can see that people are leaving bad jobs for better jobs. And, that all looks great, but you can say the markets are doing well. But the reality is people really hate it when prices go up. And when they tamed inflation to the extent they did, I think that some partisans of the administration were or some liberal economic wonks I know were like, well, they solved the problem. They whipped inflation and they had a soft landing. And, Larry Summers was wrong about that too. And the problem is politically, economically speaking, they're right. They tamed inflation. Politically speaking, to voters, it's not like, well, what does the chart say inflation is doing at this exact moment? To voters, it's, 4 years ago, things cost this much. Now they cost this much. You haven't got them to cost what they did 4 years ago again. I'm mad about it. Eventually, they get used to the new prices as things stabilize. But I think they were kind of stuck with that. Now, had we had a president who was capable of, communicating effectively with the public, maybe that president could have explained to the public, look, yes, inflation is real. We're getting it under control. We understand that you hate these high prices, but look at all the good things that are happening. And we didn't have that. And I think I think the overriding lesson of the Biden years is it really matters that you have a president who can be an effective communicator, especially on TV and in viral internet clips and so on. And we had the exact opposite of that. And I think that will probably affect the next race. The other big lesson of the Biden years, and the one that I was hyper focused on, though I don't know that it had quite as large a political effect as this, is don't do a genocide. Don't stubbornly co-sign your party and its entire moral stakes and reputation to a literal genocide. I think that that's a good lesson in general.
So I sort of feel like I'm the big socialist. I'm sort of like looking for like because I think everything you said is, as far as the inflation and Biden and his age, that's all I think true. But one lesson I took from the campaign and also from the Hillary loss is there's this lack of a positive agenda on policy. So it's like, do you remember at the end of the campaign, this comedian at the Madison Square Garden rally for Trump made this Puerto Rico joke?
Yeah.
And there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Literally the last week of the campaign, it was just Democrat Twitter being like, oh boy, they really screwed up. They made a racist joke. Now we're going to win. And it reminded me of like them saying, well, Roe being overturned, we're going to win. You know, like, oh, he's really bad. They don't like Trump. We're going to win. Whereas like, where's the positive thing? Where's the positive agenda in like healthcare? What was Kamala saying? We have to defend Obamacare.
Right.
We have to protect Social Security. It's all defensive. There's nothing positive. And one thing I'm sort of mystified by, and I'm curious for your take, is we see automation, robotics, AI coming online now. It's terrifying for like, imagine you're an Uber driver and you have 3 kids and you're in Texas and you're watching Waymos with no drivers go around. The fear you must have in your heart. This is the time for the public is ready for people to say, we need universal health care. Duh. If Italy has it, which has no big tech companies, we must have it. That's one thing. And then to respond to things like, you know, they talk about entitlement cuts. Democrats should say, not only are we never going to discuss cutting these entitlements, the only thing we're going to discuss is expanding them. To be bold. This is the time we need a much larger social safety net so people don't live terrified. And I don't see this where Bernie gets it. But beyond that, I don't see it. Where is it?
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that it wasn't particularly likely that Kamala Harris, of all people, was going to fix that in her sort of, you know, last minute emergency campaign. But overall, I mean, that's a critique I've had of the Democratic Party for at least a decade. I mean, I was, you know, vocally for Bernie both times. I think that, you know, I think Bernie's campaigns only look better and more prescient with the passage of time. I mean, it's incredible to me to watch all these, you know, post 2024, you know, Democratic recriminations from, you know, the abundance crowd or whatever, where they're like, why couldn't we run, you know, a not particularly woke, you know, plain-spoken white man who wants to address bread and butter economic issues in like a populist way and like take on the oligarchy. And I'm like, you know, every single one of you was like, was a woke Hillary liberal back in 2016 when we were doing exactly what you're saying, and you all made fun of us, demonized us, called us racist and sexist. Now you've pivoted to being to being more anti-woke than we are, as a sort of like, you know, hyper overreaction to getting everything wrong. I mean, meanwhile, Bernie has been saying the same things in the same way for basically his entire life. They're vindicated, but he's really old right now. His heir is AOC, who I think is a really talented politician, though I get the sense you're about to have some criticisms of her, which are probably valid. But you know, at the very least, I do think AOC has spoken to some of that like higher vision and aspiration and is a very, very effective communicator of it in a way that a whole generation of Democrats have failed to be. And I think Harris was not egregious in that regard. She was utterly representative of what the party has been for most of our lives.
I saw an interview with Pete Buttigieg. It was like 2 hours on this podcast called Flagrant.
Yeah, I watched some clips of it.
Yeah, and I swear to you, his big must-do policy item that, like, you know, if I was president, this would be my top priority, was paid paternity leave.
I mean, it's a good idea.
I know, no, it's a good idea, but my point is, the Democrats, their agenda is so pathetically measly. Like, do you remember when Biden was bragging about how he was able to negotiate the drug price of insulin, not for all Americans, just for poor old people in Medicaid?
Well, what's the famous Kamala tweet from 2020 that is like a parody of exactly what you're talking about? It's like they're going to do like special tax credits for like Pell Grant recipients who founded a business in like a struggling community within the last 2 years. And it's both paltry, it's incredibly wonky, it doesn't roll off the tongue. And also, I think someone was pointing out that, not that this is necessarily bad, but that it's basically like a gentrifier subsidy. It's basically like if you set up like a wine shop in like a formerly impoverished or urban neighborhood, like they'll give you a small tax credit for it.
David, during the debate, which everybody thought she crushed Trump, I thought it was more even. Her big selling point was a tax credit.
My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to startup small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy.
Right.
And like, I just want the party to realize, if you run on a tax credit in 2028, prepare to lose. Like, that is pathetic. We need to be so much. And also, to your point, this getting away from means testing.
Right.
From making everything so complex, whereas everything is tied to your taxes, and you have to apply to be in the program, to get into the lottery. You know, I'm really, it's a bit scary to listen to Pete Buttigieg, where his big thing is Trump is bad, and my agenda is paid paternity leave. That's it.
Yeah, I will say, though, I'm not a huge Pete fan.
Mm-hmm.
I do think he's an effective communicator.
Yeah.
I do think that a thing he has that will probably serve him well, assuming he's running for president, which everyone assumes, you know, he has genuinely impressed me when he goes on Fox News or when he goes on this sort of podcast, and he's not just like smart and fluent, but like he basically takes control of the conversation in a way that if you're going to go on these, like, that's what you have to do. You have to make it your conversation rather than theirs. Bernie is good at this too. But you know, I can't overstate enough that I know it's not a socialist critique, but not to say socialist critiques are wrong, but just how much having a president who could barely go on TV damaged the Democrats, I think, and damaged their credibility, and made it impossible to deal with you know, the Afghanistan withdrawal. I mean, you can criticize how the Afghanistan withdrawal went, but, you know, it was a popular idea in the first place. Imagine a president who could have forcefully defended what he was doing. We didn't have that president.
Yeah. I agree with you on Buttigieg. He's talented, but it's sort of like, where's the beef? And my big message to Democrats is get more primitive. Start thinking like a caveman. Literally like somebody's like, okay, you win. What do I get? What do I get?
Right.
And it's like, I told this to Jacob Silverman, Democrats should become the party that Republicans like pre-2016 used to say they were. You know, they used to say, Democrats just want to give everybody free stuff. Become that party.
Yeah.
Give people stuff.
It'll always be shocking that like Biden didn't want his name on you know, free money he was handing out, whereas Trump, of course, that's like his entire approach to governance. I mean, I think Biden even later admitted that in like a rare moment of cogency that was a mistake, and it's like, of course that's a mistake. We all told you to do that. Yeah, I mean, clearly a bigger vision is needed. The caveat to this, the thing that I think we're all going to have to think hard about going into the next election cycle, is the amount of serious damage that the current administration is now doing to not just to like the lives of people it's deporting but also to the administrative state that we've kind of taken for granted our whole lives. I mean, it's absolutely staggering, and it means that, on the one hand, I believe, assuming we still have free elections in 2 and 4 years, which for now we probably will, though I worry. But assuming that we do, I do think the Democrats will clean up because I think thermostatic reactions and polarization are real predictable factors in our politics. And Trump has already lost historic levels of popularity. He was never very popular to begin with. He's burned through in his first 100 days, I don't know, 15 points of approval or something. There's not a lot of undecideds either. The polls I've seen are like no undecideds 2-1 against Trump's, or close to that, 60-40, 65-35. That kind of number people are pissed at Trump, and they should be, because aside from all the specific outrages like the deportations without due process or destroying USAID, or take your pick. I think the big thing that's driving this is he's destroying the economy quite willfully. The market turmoil, the tariffs that are going to hit and make everyone poorer, basically. I think people already see it coming. They're already scared. Wall Street is scared. The Wall Street wing of the Republican Party is openly furious at him. And that's before the tariff price increases really hit, as everyone expects they will soon. At which point I think we're in for a widespread economic and social catastrophe of the likes we haven't really ever seen, and that is entirely Donald Trump's fault, and everyone will see it's entirely Donald Trump's fault. It did not need to happen. It would not have happened under Harris or under a more typical, pre-Trump Republican president. It's not, a housing bubble popping or a business cycle thing. It's not a pandemic. It is Donald Trump destroying the U.S. economy. So with all that, I think we're going to get, assuming, again, free elections, Democrats are going to sweep back into power pretty much on an anti-Trump message. Now, the question is, from there, where do they go, especially if we get a Democratic president in 2028? Let's say it's Pete. Let's say it's AOC, one of them. Where do we go from there? Like, I think you and I agree, we'd like to see a big transformative agenda, a Green New Deal and all that. But they're going to be working with, not just probably thin governing margins, but a basically broken state. And I think it's easier to break a state than to fix it. I think it would be easier, for instance, so like USAID, right? Like, there are things you can criticize USAID for, but there are, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of people, mostly in Africa, who are going to die from the cessation of U.S. Life-saving aid. They're going to dismantle PEPFAR, the one good thing George W. Bush ever did. So that's going to kill a lot of people. Imagine starting those again. Imagine like getting something that ambitious through Congress if, let's say, the margin shifted to just slightly Democratic as opposed to just slightly Republican. Like, how do we get to like the kind of great society mode of governance where we can actually do ambitious things like that, in a country as polarized as this, and in a country where, where basically half the public doesn't believe in objective reality anymore?
Well, I agree with you, but I think we're not going to have that problem until, you and your friends, the DSA, I need you guys to, first of all, I would tweak one thing. I think we should just say free healthcare, universal healthcare for all Americans. Honestly, I think
we should run on that, but how do we do it?
Well, I'm saying an NHS model might be a little too scary. I'm sort of attracted to the idea of maybe we just say the German model, but that's one thing. But we also need more. And I want you guys to come up with something with a good catchphrase that's about expanding the social safety net for AI. Like, we need
it. We need all of that. I mean, we need a sweeping, holistic vision of how we're going to respond to the actual problems, very much including how AI is going to put people out of work, which everyone I know is scared about.
But we need something so simple that, like, a guy at a truck stop in Nebraska will, in 2028, will know, well, I don't agree with the Democrats on some of them other things, but I want that, insert whatever it is. I want that.
Right.
That meaning this Obama, I call it the Obama disease. The idea that voters want these grand speeches about lofty. They don't want that. They want something tangible, material. And we need something really juicy. Something so juicy the Republicans are like, they're trying to bribe voters. That's
no. I mean, I agree, but I think delivering is hard. And actually, I think one reason Trump is is already having such a collapse in popularity is, he promised things he can't deliver. I mean, he basically told America, we're gonna pass these big, beautiful tariffs. It's gonna bring back factories and manufacturing jobs, and you'll be thriving again. And in reality, he's going to increase the price of everything. He's not going to bring back factory jobs. Everyone will be poorer, and people are already starting to feel it. And people aren't going to be able to get their kids Christmas presents, and he's telling them they should be happy with that. I mean, that's it's a disastrous approach. But then, so what do we do if we run on, we're going to give you, universal health care. We're going to give you a basic income. We're going to, build free housing for everyone. We're going to do all these things. And then it turns out we can't get anything through Congress. And we can't administer the state as well as we even could have a few years ago. How's that going to turn out?
I think that's definitely true. But we should have our Project 2025 where we already start thinking about, okay, the healthcare thing, that will be a problem with the 60 votes in the Senate. But we need to think about areas like building. Like, I think it'd be great if a Democrat ran on, I'm going to build high-speed rail, and said, and it's going to be done in 4 years. And then what you would have to do, and this is something maybe we should consider from the abundance people, is the only way that you can do that, where it's done fast enough, like FDR, where people will actually see it, is you will have to do something where it's like, okay, we're doing the high-speed rail. I'm sorry, we're just taking all this land.
I think the abundance people make some good points. Yeah. I have some questions about what's going on behind the scenes there with money, with certain associations.
It's not sufficient.
Well, it's a lot of more like inside baseball stuff about like who's paying for the abundance agenda, who, the think tanks that back it, like what personnel are involved. Why do they seem to trust people on the right more than people on the left? I have a lot of questions about this, but some of their ideas, including what I think is their central idea that's not original to them, that's been around for a while, YIMBYism, I'm broadly aligned with. I mean, I think of myself as a left YIMBY, which means I support, tenant protections and, rent control and public housing. But I also agree with them. Yeah, we do need to build more housing. We do need to make it easier to build housing. A lot of it will have to be market rate. Private developers are going to be a part of it. Land use is too restrictive. And yeah, you can, to a certain extent, blame, petty, selfish local interests for preventing badly needed housing. I mean, anyone who lives in city like I do and pays attention to this knows that. So I'm aligned with them on a lot of that. And I think what you're saying with rail, same idea. Like, you're going to need to do some eminent domain and piss off a lot of like local businesses and homeowners to build high-speed rail effectively. I think that's definitely true. So I think the left and abundance are going to have a complicated relationship in the best case scenarios for the Democrats over the next few years. But I don't see, to the extent I represent the left, which is questionable, I don't see it as like it has to be a war between the left and abundance. I think I think every smart left critique of abundance, and I've read a few, says it's a lot of good ideas and there is a lot of common ground to be found.
If the next Democrat president went to you and said, I'm making my domestic policy, give me like 2 or 3 people I should talk to. Oh, for God. Me, one person I would say is Matt Bruenig. I want you to talk to him for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't be against talking to Matt Bruenig. He's a smart guy.
Who else would you suggest?
I think Matt Bruenig has a lot of interesting things to say about inequality and economics.
Yeah, make government programs simple. Stop means-testing. Big message.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious person I would say on the foreign policy front is Matt Duss, who I've been talking to for years, and who I know is just, really good people and has the right values, and takes foreign policy seriously. So, I mean, I would assume that I would assume, for instance, if AOC is running for president, that's exactly who she'll be talking to.
So let's talk about Israel. Let's talk about Gaza.
Always.
What do you see when you look back from October 6th to where we are now? Can you just lay out how you see what's occurred?
I mean, in a single word, genocide, is what I would say. And I feel it's morbid, but one thing where I feel very at peace with my own commentary is, I look at what some other people I know were saying on October 7th. There were, on the one hand, people who I think were very, very preoccupied with the horror of what had been done to Israelis on that day, and with making sure that everyone was adequately voicing how terrible this was for Israelis. There were other people, I know a few, who, their reaction was championing, Palestinians tearing down the fence around Gaza and liberate this moment of liberation. And, that I am glad that I did not do either of those things. You can go and see the Twitter record of what my very first reaction was in the morning of October 7th. And my reaction was that the Israeli government under Netanyahu is full of open, genocidal fascists, basically. I'm paraphrasing. That's basically what I said. And they're about to commit a genocide. And that was where my head was at when I woke up to this news. It wasn't, look at this horrible thing that's happened to the Israelis. It wasn't, thank goodness this is the moment of Palestinian liberation. I thought, what's about to happen is Israel is about to fight a genocidal war against innocent Palestinians in Gaza. And I'm sad to say, I have been proved right on that every single day since. I know many people who had both of those reactions, who have had to sort of, I would say of the people of the, let's say, liberal Zionists I knew, who their reaction was focusing on what had happened to Israelis. Many of them, I think, have and whose reaction in the days and weeks to come was look, Israel has a valid war to fight against Hamas right now. And I was like, you don't understand. They're going to commit a genocide. They're going to inflict horrific suffering on the civilian population of Gaza. They want to do that. That's a feature, not a bug for them. They're not going to fight the precision-guided war against Hamas that you fantasize about them fighting because you want there to be a good Israel. I was right. I was right, not because I'm a genius or prescient, but because I, largely through my work at Jewish Currents, but in general had been paying very, very close attention to Israel and how it operates for a while, and particularly to the Netanyahu cabinet and who they were and what they were doing all year in the West Bank prior to October 7th. And there was no informed person should have expected anything other than that. I will say there were times when I allowed myself to believe, maybe after, 3 months and 15,000 casualties, maybe the Biden administration might start reining them in. And it became very clear that no, they were, for either because they were ideologically aligned or because Biden was perhaps literally asleep at the wheel, that wasn't happening. And that was also clear to me all along. I mean, I remember there was a moment when Biden called for a ceasefire, and you had people like Michael Kazin at Dissent who were saying, see, he called for a ceasefire, right? Stop criticizing him now. He's doing the best he can. You don't know behind the scenes. Recently, Drop Site News showed what was pretty obvious to me at the time. The Biden people never tried. They never tried to stop anything. I think the blood of untold numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, tens of thousands of children, are on the Biden administration's hands, on Biden's hands, on Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken's hands. I think that It's one of the worst crimes of the century, and I feel like my conscience is clean on it, but it's a disgusting thing to have witnessed, and it's not over. It's probably going to get worse. It's a bipartisan project, and it's a disgrace.
What would you have done if you were the PM of Israel after October 7th?
Well, I can answer that, but I'm gonna dodge the question first and say I don't like starting the story on October 7th, for many reasons. I could go back to the Nakba. I could go back to how Israel was founded on a giant ethnic cleansing. I could go back to all kinds of things. The more than 50 years of illegal occupation and colonization of the West Bank. I mean, all of that should be in there. I wouldn't be the prime minister of Israel because no one who believes what I believe would be. What I think America should have done at many points prior to October 7th and there were times in the not so distant past when it was willing to consider such things, is condition military aid to Israel and use that to force them into line with international law. The last administration that took that seriously was the George H.W. Bush administration, which when the Israeli government wanted to expand settlements in the West Bank, Jim Baker, who was Secretary of State at the time, said, we're restricting military aid to you because that's illegal and it's also against U.S. interests in the region, and we don't want you to do that. One of the leading champions in Congress, in the Senate, against their doing that was Joe Biden. In general, Democrats at the time were more pro-Israel than Republicans were. But that era has passed. I mean, the George W. Bush neoconservative era, much more fully aligned with Israelis, but so did Bill Clinton. I think Barack Obama personally admired Bush's approach and had some of the same feelings. I mean, he knew Rashid Khalidi. He knew, he was familiar with the criticisms, and I think his advisor Ben Rhodes was too. But at the end of the day, he gave the Israelis a huge new aid package. I mean, I will give Obama credit for the Iran deal, which he did against the Israel lobby's wishes, and Netanyahu clearly decided he was going all in on the Republican Party at that time. But still, I feel like the last president who really, was willing to play hardball with the Israelis was H.W. Bush 30 some years ago. And, I think when you get to the Biden administration, well, I should give Trump his share of the blame too, because when Trump came to office, he pulled out of the Iran deal unilaterally. And, this thing that the Obama administration had taken real risks on, he scrapped that. He did the Abraham Accords, which are not a peace deal. They're a normalization of Israel's occupation. He had Brett McGurk in office pushing hard for Israeli-Saudi rapprochement. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He basically gave Netanyahu everything he wanted. And then when Biden comes to power, Biden, who'd been an Israel hawk for decades, ends up keeping McGurk and basically locking in all of Trump's accomplishments. It's not like he reversed them. It's not like we're moving the embassy back from Jerusalem now. They didn't get us back into the Iran deal after vaguely trying to. But why would the Iranians ever trust us again after Trump? And they kept McGurk, and they kept this prioritization of the Saudi Israeli thing, and they never at any point made a serious push for peace. Jake Sullivan famously wrote, in the summer of 2023 that the Middle East had never been quieter.
It was actually just a few days before October 7th, I think.
Or it was right before, whenever. Yeah. I mean, it hadn't been published at the time, but at Foreign Affairs. But anyway, it's all to say, I don't think you can trace Biden's failure to what they did after October 7th. And of course, Netanyahu is a crook, which even many people who supported him supported his war after October 7th had been saying openly beforehand. What would I have done if I were the prime minister of Israel? I mean, if I had been Benjamin Netanyahu, I would have done exactly what he did because it's kept him in power, and that's clearly what he wants. Um, you know, if I'd been a better prime minister than Benjamin Netanyahu, I wouldn't have had IDF soldiers going around facilitating pogroms in the West Bank instead of watching the border with Gaza. I'd like to think October 7th wouldn't have happened on my watch if I were somehow in that position.
So, for instance, my take at the time was, I actually think I didn't trust Ben-Gvir and stuff, so I actually think I opposed them even going in, which
I mean,
seems,
you should. They're fast.
Yeah, I know, which seems sort of crazy now that crazy compared to where we've gone to. And then I later thought, all this bombing is stupid. Like, this whole destroy Hamas is stupid. It's a stupid goal. I did think that they should take the Rafah crossing to cut off the arms supply to Hamas, and simply just said, we're not going to bomb Gaza. We're not going to try to hunt down Hamas and destroy the whole thing. But we're going to say after October 7th, we can't have all these weapons coming into Gaza, and then said to Hamas, fire your rockets, please. Because those are your last rockets. And then, if they saw Sinwar at the beach, they could kill him to death.
I think in terms of what should international law prescribe them doing, I think that's obviously a more humane and sane response than what they did. But in some ways, I reject the framing of the question, because the idea that Israel's goal in the actual Israel we have in the wake of October 7th is, to get the hostages home, punish the guilty parties in Hamas, avoid excess civilian casualties, I think is misreading what the actual situation would be if anyone were the prime minister of Israel in there. Under those circumstances, let alone Netanyahu, but if a better person than Netanyahu was, the Israeli public, after what actually happened on October 7th, wanted revenge. And they had revenge on a level that would be shocking. And think about the number of times in the previous decade and a half when, Hamas had shot some rockets into Sderot or had kidnapped one IDF soldier or whatever, and the Israelis respond by killing, let's say, 1,000 people in Gaza. Versions of this happened, 5 times in the years between 2005 and 2023. There's a whole series of wars like that, Occupation Cast Lead and so on. That's smaller Hamas provocations lead to 1,000 Palestinians dead under less extremist governments than Netanyahu had. So what do you think is going to happen when they kill or allegedly rape or whatever happened on October 7th, when they do something of that scale on Israeli soil? Guaranteed tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians had to die. Guaranteed. Or at least 10,000. That was always going to happen. That was crystal clear to me the moment I learned about October 7th. And even if it hadn't been Netanyahu, I don't think the Israeli public, and I'm talking about the overwhelming majority of the Israeli public, would have settled for anything less than that.
My question was simply, if they had a military reaction to October 7th, and let's say it was so much less, let's say the whole thing ended 3 months after, and the amount of dead was 7,000, let's say.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to make light of that, but
no, I understand what you're
would
saying.
you have called that genocide?
It's a good question. It's a totally hypothetical scenario that I didn't think was going to happen, so I could dodge it. But would I have called that genocide? On some level, I would call Israel's entire approach to the Palestinians, going back to its founding, a kind of slow motion ethnic cleansing. Maybe that's a better term than genocide. I think collective punishment of civilians based on their nationality and place of birth, is at least arguably genocidal. I think that the basic condition of the Palestinians of Gaza is the product of essentially an ongoing decades-old ethnic cleansing. So I don't see why really anything Israel does to them militarily isn't, part of that larger story. But I understand that, yeah, had they had a smaller limit to what they were doing that was seen to be proportional to the, actual crime and focused on ultimately getting the hostages home, I think people might talk about this war differently than what has actually happened, which is a campaign of indiscriminate slaughter on a massively larger scale.
Okay.
That at this point has basically been called genocidal by every major scholar and human rights organization that weighs in on such things. I mean, it's not really controversial to experts anymore.
So maybe I'm dumb. This is an honest question, because I think my understanding of what genocide means is maybe outdated. I'm going to tell you my understanding. I want you to just correct me. I'm not playing cute. My understanding of genocide is an army says, we're going to wipe out all the Muslims out of some region of Russia, let's say. And they just go in and they're just like, all right, get the families, shoot them all. We're just going to systematically kill the population of an ethnic group in an area. That's my understanding.
I mean, that certainly would count, but it's not the only way.
Yeah, but so explain this, because like when Roz Siegel wrote the Jewish Currents article on October 13th, so 6 days after October 7th, I'm stupid, but like I thought, it's already a genocide. How is that? Can you explain that?
Well, I can't speak for Roz Siegel, and I wasn't, although I appreciated that piece at the time. I haven't reread it recently. I was not responsible for commissioning it. My affiliation with Jewish Currents has been basically honorary for the last 2 years or so. I used to be a part-time editor there. I'm what's called a contributing editor now, so I'm on the masthead and still affiliated with them. But anyway, never mind that. Just to say that I can't personally speak for that piece, but I was already thinking in those terms. I'm also not a legal expert or legal scholar myself, and I can't quote chapter and verse on like international conventions on genocide. My understanding is, like, legally speaking, it's very, very hard to prosecute someone for genocide, and it's basically only ever been done once. Under modern conventions, which was, I think, for a Serbian genocidaire in Bosnia. And I think, and if anyone watching this, if I'm getting anything wrong, write in, and I'm sorry. But my basic understanding is, in order to prove it legally, you need like a written note where they say something as explicit as you were laying out in your hypothetical scenario, where they say, like, the goal is to take all the Muslims in this population and kill them because they are Muslims, and like put that in writing under your name. And then on top of that, you need to, get arrested and brought to The Hague and tried with that as evidence. So this is all to say a whole lot of things that might count as genocide don't quite, for legal or circumstantial reasons, meet that standard. And then it becomes an almost academic argument about, well, whether do they count anyway, including things that happened before the term genocide had even been coined. I mean, for instance, the Armenian genocide, and I believe it was a genocide, and most of the world, other than the Turkish government, I think, believes that. Most people who've looked into it at all. But there was no such term as genocide at the time, right? I mean, it's a retroactive designation. And largely what it was a forced expulsion of an ethnic group from certain territory, marched through the desert with extremely high casualty rates and extremely high abuse rates. It's not like they wiped out the Armenian people altogether. There are Armenians all over the world. There are Armenians who survived those marches and, made it to what's now the Independent Republic of Armenia, or to other parts of what was then Russia, becoming the Soviet Union. It's not like the Turkish government put out a memorandum saying we're going to hunt down and kill the Armenians wherever they are all over the world. It wasn't like that. It was, they had a plan to get the Armenians out of their territory. They implemented that plan by force. There were huge predictable casualties as a result. And I think in hindsight, we can call that a genocide.
They drove them, correct me if I'm wrong, they drove them into basically like a desert without food or water.
Yeah, they marched
right?
them across a desert and many died.
And they had no food or water. So it was obvious that many of them at least were going to die.
The goal was to get Armenians out of Turkey, to ethnically cleanse Turkey of Armenians, or large areas of Turkey of Armenians. And they did not care how many died in the process, or they considered that a feature, not a bug. They did not intend to and did not come close to wiping out the world's Armenian population or even the region's Armenian population. I mean, the region of the Middle East and the Caucasus. But they set out to ethnically cleanse their territory of Armenians, and they were largely successful at horrific cost. And I think that is the kind of thing that counts as a genocide. So flash forwarding to the Israelis, I mean, as I said a moment ago, you can see it as a slow motion. I mean, I think the accepted academic figure is that something like 700,000 Palestinians were driven out of their homes during the 1948-49 Independence War, which Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe. If you look at the UN partition plan map that Arab states rejected, but were outvoted, and the Palestinians were in no position to vote themselves because they were a colonial, they were a British colonial territory being turned over to the UN, basically. If you look at the partition map that was proposed that the Israelis agreed to, and you look at a map of what's considered the legally recognized, post-48, pre-67 state of Israel now, and you look carefully, you'll note there's actually significant territories that were not in the partition plan that ended up becoming what's part of internationally recognized Israel. Now, the reason they weren't in the Jewish half of the partition plan was because large numbers of Palestinians lived in them, and the partition plan was supposed to be carved around that very carefully, although it was still very generous to the Jews relative to where they lived. When the war was fought, and mainstream Israeli historians now claim this openly and have justified it, Benny Morris being the iconic example, the Israelis ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. The reason why Gaza, going into this war and for decades, has been one of the most overcrowded places in the world is because the Palestinian population of southern Israel was heavily relocated into this trapped little enclave, which Israelis completely control the borders of, or at least with the major lapse being October 7th. So to begin with, they essentially crammed, 1 million people into a kind of open air, refugee camp that they controlled its access to the outside world, and that until 2005 they were illegally settling also. In the West Bank, I mean, I've had people who've been there recently, Jews who've been there recently, tell me that they're witnessing a sort of slow motion ethnic cleansing there, which had begun before October 7th under the Netanyahu-Ben Gvir government, where, they're just seizing land. Or if you've seen the movie No Other Land, which just won an Oscar, it basically depicts how this works in the West Bank. It's classic settler colonial land seizures, pushing people out of their homes, grabbing up and, fencing off territory, building illegal settlements there, cramming people into tighter and tighter ghettos and killing them when they resist. In Gaza, from, the first days of after October 7th, you had major officials in the Israeli government and the Israeli military using genocidal rhetoric, saying, calling the Palestinians as a people animals, saying there are no innocents in Gaza, there are no civilians, everyone in Gaza is in Hamas. These are all pretexts for genocidal war crimes, which no one...
What was his name? What was the... Yoav Gallant. He says that was... Yeah, he said that he was referring to Hamas, but but there were lots of statements.
I don't want to quote any. Yoav Gallant said that, but I don't want to quote anyone exactly off the top of my head. But and I know that many prominent Israelis and their supporters around the world were saying, including like Republican. I think Lindsey Graham said some things to this effect. There was a clear understanding that there was going to be, collective punishment is illegal under international law. And there was a clear understanding that the Israelis and their supporters regarded every human being in Gaza as inherently, guilty, supportive of Hamas, and, and for that matter, they weren't letting people leave. They had nowhere to go. They were cramming them into a tighter and tighter part of the country, of Gaza, saying they weren't, going to bomb you if you were in Rafah. Then they started bombing Rafah. They've bombed every part of the Gaza Strip.
But I think they have wanted they have wanted Egypt to open the border. But so I just
why? I mean, I don't want to defend the U.S.
Yeah.
backed dictatorship in Egypt that was installed in a coup over a decade ago. But at the same time, why is it Egypt's fault that Israel is bombing and ethnically cleansing people who aren't Egyptian? Why should Egypt have to absorb that refugee population?
So I just want to be clear on this one thing. After October 7th, you don't think Israel could have any kind of military attack on Hamas and Gaza?
Well, no, I think they could and would as a matter of what was analytically. I thought that's what was inevitably going to happen.
No, I just mean like morally or whatever.
Morally, I think that Israel is, as long as it maintains its illegal occupation and settlement of Palestinian territory, Israel is morally not on solid ground. I mean, I don't support Palestinians attacking Israeli civilians. I don't endorse that. But I think it's inevitably the kind of thing that's going to happen when Israel is maintaining the colonial posture that it has for its entire history. If I saw the Israelis taking steps in good faith to end the occupation and get to some sort of negotiated two-state solution, or in the wildest dreams, a binational state where everyone gets along, if I believed the Israeli government and public had the slightest inclination to do that, then I would be rooting for them to do it. But I think that Israel's actual existing posture has been one of gradually seizing land and marginalizing, killing, or expelling Palestinians. And in that context, I'm not that interested in what would be a moral thing for the Israelis to do. I am more interested in what would be a moral thing for my government to do, which is to start flexing muscle and political and military and economic pressure on the Israelis to change their posture. Of course, I have no expectation that the Trump government is going to do that.
I'm just curious on the Egypt thing.
Yeah.
If you believe during the Holocaust, there was a ship from Germany called the USS St. Louis, right?
Right.
And we denied it. We didn't let them in. I think if me and you were alive back then, we would have been clamoring for them to let them in.
Without question. I think that the U.S. Should welcome refugees from all over the world.
If you believe that it's a genocide and the Israeli government is just evil genocidal government, I hear your point about changing American policy, but why is there no clamoring for Egypt to open the border so they can escape the genocide?
I mean, I think as a humanitarian matter, I don't know. I think that this is a complicated question because I think the U.S. should accept Palestinian refugees. I think lots of people should accept Palestinian refugees. And at the same time, I think that the refugee crisis that we're talking about here is entirely a product of Israel's insistence on a Jewish supremacist state in its territory. The Palestinians need to flee and need to flee Gaza because of ongoing Israeli policies that are premised on Palestinians do not have a right to live in this territory.
Yeah, but I mean, we could have made that point about Nazi Germany. We could have said, well, the blame's on Hitler.
Yeah, but one difference is we weren't giving Nazi Germany billions of dollars in military aid a year and treating them as our most valued ally.
Sure.
I don't want to defend U.S. policy at that time. It was terrible. And there were businesses, working with Nazi Germany at the time. But the relationship that the U.S. has with Israel is one where if our leadership were so inclined, if they weren't essentially politically cowed by the Israel lobby, both parties at this point, we could be exerting real pressure. Also, if we had a government that wasn't the catastrophe that we do have right now, we could be exerting pressure, and we could have at any point in the last few decades on the Israelis to withdraw settlements, to take real meaningful steps toward a Palestinian state. There was a time when we did, kind of, arguably, but I think we have a really dreadful record. I see my role as an American and as an American Jew as largely advocating for that posture from the U.S., though at the moment I think it's.
I understand that. I just don't understand
Oh, as far as Egypt taking refugees or any other country taking refugees, I mean, I think in the short term, yes, like that would be the humane thing to do. But for the Israelis, that would also be a win and a vindication of their policy of, essentially trying to wipe out. I mean, I think Israel considers it a policy win if there are no Palestinians left in Gaza. And so I'm wary of a policy that's basically about vindicating Israel and rewarding them for their ethnic cleansing.
But wouldn't you have to make that argument about the USS St. Louis that we can't let them in because this would be giving Hitler a win?
I mean, at that point, I see what you're saying. Under those circumstances, I don't think there was nearly as much that the US could have done about Hitler and his internal policies in his own internationally recognized territory, by the way, because a lot of what Israel is doing is not in its internationally recognized territory. And I think at the point where you have a boat full of refugees arriving, in your port and you're turning them away because you have a xenophobic immigration policy, and I've had one for years at that point, I think that's disgusting in its own right. I don't, it's not like the US was actively, I don't know. I think there's a lot of differences between the two situations.
Okay.
But I do admit it's a sort of a hard moral problem. Like, yes, of course, I think that lots of countries should be accepting, including the US to a much greater extent than it has, should be accepting refugees from Gaza right now.
Do you think the IDF purposely tries to kill children in Gaza?
Yes. I think there's pretty abundant evidence for that.
Like, to what degree? To, like, degree they're like, oh, I see a little girl on the playground, let's shoot a rocket at her?
I definitely think there are Israelis who've made that call, and I don't think they're generally punished for it. But I also think that the overall policy is one of pretty indiscriminate slaughter.
No, there's been war crimes. The footage. No.
I don't think there've been one-off war crimes either. There've been some egregious ones, but I think that the actual policy of the Netanyahu government has been to, encourage and facilitate war crimes. I mean, that's how they have fought this war, which I think was predictable.
In 1948, let me put it this way. We go back in a time machine, and they say, David, both sides say, David, join our side, the Arab invading army and the Israelis. Which side would you join?
Well, I don't think I mean, there's many hypotheticals in this scenario.
Right.
Realistically, if I were a Jew in the region at the time, I probably would have been on the Israeli side, but I don't mean that as a moral judgment. I just mean that is what historically would have happened.
Right. Let me put it differently. What should David Ben-Gurion have done differently? Just surrendered, or what?
I don't feel qualified to
right.
in great detail game out, week by week, month by month, what would have been the better course of action. I think he was certainly aware that he was ordering ethnic cleansings. I think he thought that was necessary. I think to this day, you will find a spectrum of Israelis and Zionists who will defend those decisions. There might be others who would criticize them. But I don't feel very qualified to answer that.
Okay. So what would the...
I don't think, as with October 7th, I don't think the story starts there either, right? I mean, by that point, you're decades into a colonial project facilitated by the British. I could criticize Lord Balfour for what he did. I mean, in hindsight is 2020, but a lot of I would recommend reading Rashid Khalidi's 100-Year War on Palestine, which I think very fairly goes through, essentially every turning point for the last century.
What do you think that if the Jews had lost, what do you think would have been done to them?
Nothing good. I also think if they hadn't been there in the first place, I think it's worth gaming out the scenario where there is no significant Jewish entity or Zionist entity in Palestine at the end of World War II. But the war otherwise goes the same way, and the Nazis are defeated, having killed 6 million Jews. What happens to the remaining Jews of Europe at that point? It wouldn't have been great. There would have been a lot of terrible things. I'm familiar with the Yad massacre. I don't want to sugarcoat anything that would have happened in, post-World War II Eastern or Central Europe. But, in the spirit of history, things don't always happen redemptively, right? I mean, things are contingent and terrible things happen. I mean, you could roll back the clock and try to find a way to prevent the Holocaust from happening in the first place, but it's not. I mean, I don't want to get too much into it, but
Right.
like, I have relatives who, by marriage, who were Jewish, who lived in post World War II Eastern Europe, and who, I don't want to get too much into their life stories. I actually know a lot of Jews whose families were in post World War II Eastern Europe, whether it was Romania or the Soviet Union, who were living there in the 50s, 60s, 70s, sometimes longer, sometimes into the early 90s. Many of them are pro-Israel. Sometimes that's something we argue about. Many of them have relatives in Israel who went there later. I don't think any of them think, it was great for them to live in communist, dictatorial Eastern Europe in the post-World War II era, but they did. They did, and they survived, and some of them ended up in Israel, some of them ended up in the US, some of them are still in those places now. And what? I mean, I can't, this isn't how history works. Like, I can't say, like, it's better or worse if they're here or there.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's great, that Jews lived under Ceausescu for as long as they did, but like, lots of things would have happened, in this alternate reality.
I didn't phrase it well. I'm just looking at this quote. This is from the Secretary General of the Arab League in 1947. Azam Pasha says, "This will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacres in the Crusades." And there are other quotes that, the Arabs intend to conduct the war so as to cleanse Palestine of the Jews. Oh, what I'm getting at,
happened, it would have been a catastrophe.
My question is, are there moments in history where there just are all the options are ugly?
Yes, but saying that, I don't think morally absolves the founding generation of Israelis of their situation or of the many things they had done to get to that point. I mean, they had a explicit project of building a Jewish-dominated colony within this territory and excluding Palestinian Arabs for it that began well before Hitler took power. I understand very well the tragic set of contingencies that get us to 1948, but that doesn't mean we were blameless, right? I mean, it doesn't mean like there's no moral judgment to be cast on what actually did happen.
I just want to close on anti-Semitism. Sorry for all the tough questions.
I think this is an interesting set of intellectual exercises.
I want to talk about move to sort of America. I don't know if you saw this thing between Ethan Klein and Hassan Piker.
I have not seen it. I keep seeing social media chatter about it, but this is embarrassing to admit because I probably need to go look this up right after, but I'm not totally clear who Ethan Klein is. I keep seeing his name on my timeline. I know who Hassan Piker is.
He's a YouTube guy, but I want to.
I don't watch a lot of anything.
Yeah. I want to just play this one clip because I think it gets to something I wanted to discuss with you.
This will never happen, but in a totally just world, any kind of, regardless of your background, any kind of fucking Zionist tendency should be treated in the same way as being a fucking rabid neo-Nazi. And you shouldn't even let someone be the fucking local dog catcher as Felix was posting, if they've ever exhibited any sort of like positive feelings about the state of Israel. I'm so serious about this.
Now, by the way, he didn't misspeak. He doubled down on it yesterday. He said, no, I agree.
No, I had not seen that clip. Interesting clip.
Now, I could show you a tweet from Emma Vigeland where she called Yarden Bibas and all Zionists modern-day Nazis. And so let me just put it this way. I believe all 11 of the Tree of Life synagogue victims were Zionists. Was the Tree of Life shooting an intra-neo-Nazi violence of one Nazi killing 11?
No. No, it wasn't. And we don't need to go to Tree of Life. I think most American Jews are, at least in some loose sense, Zionists, a majority. I would not have formulated that the way that Hassan did. I don't want to antagonize him or denounce him, and I'm not going to do that either. We're not particularly friends, but I have no ill will toward. I mean, I don't know him at all, except on, we're like mutual Twitter followers or whatever. But like, I don't. I'm not here to pick a fight with anyone on the left. Everyone, including me, who's been in this game a while of pontificating online, sometimes says intemperate or sweeping things. I've said things in the past that if you really pin me down, I would say a more measured version of it. But I think that the spirit in which I suspect he's saying that, or that Emma Vigeland is saying what she said, is probably one of sincere moral anger and outrage over what they've seen Israel do every day for the last year and a half, which I share. I think the urgent thing is to stop that from happening however we can, and to bear witness to it in the meantime. I don't know that it's helpful to say anyone who's ever said anything nice about Israel, especially because that would include some of the most committed anti-Zionists I know, who used to be Zionists, usually because they were raised that way and had to sort of be educated. And I believe people can and sometimes do change. I certainly wasn't always, I think teenage me probably, I don't know if I ever specifically called myself a Zionist, but I think I was raised to be a liberal Zionist and accepted a lot of things I was taught, and then I learned more. So from that point of view, no, I don't agree with that but I also don't really think it's intended in the spirit of a serious policy proposal. I think it's intended as a voicing of disgust and despair over an ongoing genocide that shows no signs of.
What do you think about proposals to ban Zionism?
But that said, Hassan should speak for himself.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't speak for.
But what do you think about like proposed bans, like no Zionists allowed in the DSA at certain conferences?
I'm not an active DSA member, in part because I kind of hate getting involved in these sorts of internecine debates and procedural fights, and I've seen some ugly ones that I feel more sane for not being involved in. Maybe that makes me, a bad leftist and that I'm not doing the organizing work or whatever. But do I think we should ban Zionists? It depends what we mean by that. I mean, I think if it's I think if it means, you dig up any evidence that anyone was ever a Zionist at any point, or ever said anything sympathetic to Israel
Bernie Sanders is a Zionist.
Yeah, no, I think from that point of view, no, I don't think I would endorse that. On the other hand, do I think there should be like a Zionism caucus within DSA where people insist on
not saying
pro-Israel? No, I mean, I ultimately I'm not in DSA in any formal way, though I'm sympathetic and have many friends who are. Ultimately, I can't litigate how they do this, but I think my general attitude, which I hope I'm putting across clearly, is I do think Zionism is wrong. I do think it is a destructive ideology, but at the same time, I think framing this in terms purely of a sort of like witch hunt litmus test type thing, as opposed to like we should be discouraging and educating Zionism and telling people the many, many people who have been raised Zionist to, learn more about the situation. And not, I don't mean to coddle them. I don't mean to go easy on them. I just mean I literally have seen people unlearn what they were raised with, and that I think is the more productive attitude to go in with. But I'm never going to endorse Zionism.
What if Israel left Gaza and West Bank completely? Would you be against Israel as a Jewish state then?
That's a hypothetical that we are so far from getting to that I don't see the point in weighing in. It depends on what happened also. I think if there were a final peace treaty agreed to between a Palestinian state and those territories and the Israelis, and they agreed this is the border and they stuck to it, then I would respect that. But I don't think that's remotely likely to happen.
If I would just want to ask how flexible you are on Israel in this sense. If I told you that in 10 years, let's say, the anti-Semitism in America would be so bad, there's like 10 GOP senators who are like open anti-Semites, and there's like a GOP primary, Nick Fuentes is running on like a Deport All Jews platform, and he gets like 30%, let's say, in Iowa. Would you have to modify your view on having a Jewish safe haven with Israel with all the problems, or are you not at all flexible?
I would be much more focused in those circumstances on stopping the neo-Nazi party you just described from taking power, which I'm already concerned about with the actual Trump government. I think we're already much closer to that than I'd like, though I won't say I feel especially threatened as a Jew, but I certainly have friends who do, and I could imagine feeling more threatened. I feel threatened, and I would say I feel more threatened for myself and for lots of people I know as an advocate for Palestinian rights than I do as a Jew. But there are also other places I would consider fleeing before I considered fleeing to Israel. I would probably look at Canada.
Peter Beinart said that to me, and as I told him, it's hard to immigrate to Canada. They have this point system. You have to have all these special skills.
In the case of the EU, I have an in. Not everybody does. I have. So that's probably where I would look first, is the EU.
Well, I don't. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
Let's not get there, okay? Let's try not to turn America. Which I think is to date. There are many things you can say about America, but I think it's been the best country for Jews there's ever been.
Right.
Right up to this day, despite everything.
Definitely.
And let's fight to keep it that way.
Right.
We're close to half the world's Jews, and I prefer what it means to be a Jew here, even now, than to what it means to be a Jew in Israel.
Right, but is the law for so I assume you want a one state, right? Equal rights.
When I was in college, Tony Judd pissed off a lot of people by endorsing a version of that, and I thought he was a hero at the time, and still do in hindsight, the late Tony Judd. At the time, I was like, that's so clearly correct and so clearly morally what should happen. I still think that way in an ideal world, but I've become a little more, I think Peter Beinart would probably say the same thing from what I know of. Peter, I do know. And from what I know of him, like, if it comes in the form of a two-state solution, great. If it comes in the form of a binational thing, great. If it comes in a confederalist one where it's sort of halfway between those, great. The important thing is everyone lives free, has democratic rights, and isn't killing each other, and has access to all the holy sites. If it's two states in a close free trade, there's freedom of movement back and forth, but all of those are so far from the actual reality, which is one of Israeli domination.
Can I tell you my proposal? It's actually unique.
Okay.
My proposal is a expanded Gaza two-state solution where Israel would triple the size of Gaza, and it would be complex, but it basically they would like build all the new housing, and then because the problem with the traditional two-state and why I think it never had a chance is the topography, right? Because you're looking down from the hills right on Ben Gurion Airport, like 5 miles from Ben Gurion Airport would be the Palestinians with the higher ground. So I just think the Israelis were never going to go for that.
Well, that's one reason why I feel like this has been a through line in this half of the conversation, but this is why, like, I think to begin with, you can't really navigate around. This was always a flawed plan. It was a flawed plan when, have you read the Khalidi book I mentioned earlier?
No, but I have interviewed him. I know him. Yeah.
Okay. He's a brilliant man, but and one of the most lucid thinkers on this topic. But the introduction to that book is I'm going to try to summarize it as best I can. It's an amazing anecdote. So Rashid Khalidi is descended from one of the like 2 or 3 great Palestinian merchant families of the pre-1948 period. Had there been a proper Palestinian state, his family probably would have been part of the ruling elite of it. And the sort of proto-bourgeoisie of the ports of Jaffa and Haifa. I forget which one he was more affiliated with. I think Jaffa, but I could be wrong. he writes about his, I don't know, maybe his great great uncle or somebody like that, who was this very learned secular man who, he knew English and French and kept up with like international like liberal newspapers, and was a very forward-looking guy in Ottoman Palestine. And in the, I guess, 1890s, he writes a letter, I think in French, to Theodor Herzl. He's read Theodor Herzl's work on establishing a Jewish homeland. And he writes a letter, and the gist of the letter is basically, you seem like a really smart guy. I think your idea of like Jewish peoplehood and building a Jewish nation in the context of, the liberal nation states that are forming all over Europe is brilliant. I sympathize with it. I have similar feelings about, the Arabs of Palestine. I think we share a lot of values in common, and I'm really impressed by your work. Just one thing. You have to understand, if you bring this idea to, the southern Levant in the Ottoman Empire, you're going to run into the Arabs who live there, and it's going to be really ugly, and there'll be a lot of fighting and killing and ethnic violence and internecine conflict. And that would be bad. So on this one point, I feel like, I respectfully disagree. But otherwise, I think you make a lot of good points. And Herzl wrote back, and he's basically like, oh, I'm not worried about that. Don't worry. It's going to be fine. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's the gist of the story. And it's just to say, from the very beginning, it's like there was a fundamental flaw in the thinking here. And this is well before the Holocaust. It's well before, obviously Herzl had seen the Dreyfus Affair and Karl Lueger, and he knew that, the pogroms, and he knew terrible things could happen. But still, this is before it's an established fact that millions of Jews are going to be killed, by a regime that doesn't even exist yet. And they're just debating the sort of 101 idea of Zionism. And it's like, there's just one big flaw here, which is you're pretending the people in this land don't exist.
But
I think that flaw has been baked in.
To play devil's advocate, someone might say there might be flaws in Herzl's vision, but ultimately, when there was a debate in Poland between a young David Ben-Gurion, who was a Zionist, saying, I'm going to the Holy Land, and anti-Zionist, Jews in the Communist Party, in the Bund, or whatever, those people died. And David Ben-Gurion lived on, so they would argue that they were more flawed.
Okay, so I share with my friend Molly Crabapple, who's a brilliant Jewish anti-Zionist artist and writer who is working on an illustrated history of the Bund right now. I share with her nostalgia for the Bund and its vision and its values. I think that informs a lot of my own present secular lefty Jewish identity in the diaspora, and a lot of people I know. I think we agree the great tragedy of one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century is that amid the wider horror of the Holocaust, this possible way forward for our people that actually did have a lot of support was eradicated. It was eradicated by Hitler. It was eradicated to a certain extent by Stalin, and it was eradicated by assimilation and McCarthyism in the U.S. too. I think that's tragic. I don't think we can go back to that. I think too much. I think we can go back to some of the values and some of the inspiration, but I don't think we're going to be a proletarian Yiddish-speaking population again. That ship has sailed. If we can honor it, though. But ultimately, I think Edward Said said words to these effect. But it's not actually the Palestinians' fault that the Holocaust happened, and it shouldn't fall on them that it did.
Where did you want the Holocaust survivors, the ones in the DP camps after the war? That some of them went to Poland and then they got kicked out of Poland again.
Well, they weren't properly kicked out of Poland. Horrible things were happening to some Jews in some parts of Poland.
So some of these Holocaust survivors went to Israel because they literally were like, we have nowhere else to go. Where did you want them to go?
It's a pure counterfactual. I feel like I alluded to this earlier.
Okay.
I think, I would want them to be safe somewhere, and they probably would have gone to different places, different European countries. Some of them would have made it to the Americas, maybe not to the United States. I mean, I think my perspective, if I had been, let's say, my great-grandparents at the time, and I had been an adult politically engaged Jew in the United States at the time, my perspective is they should come to the United States, as some Holocaust survivors did.
They weren't allowed in, though.
More should have been allowed in. That would have been the answer I would have advocated for under those circumstances. I'm not saying it would have worked, but that's what I would have pushed for at the time, to let more of them into the United States.
Final thing about the future. So but I just want to be clear. Are you against, I assume you would be like, you want a Palestinian right of return to a future state, let's say. Are you against?
I think as a general principle, people ought to have the right to return to lands that they were expelled from in war. I think that's a pretty widely recognized international principle that the Israelis try to carve out an exception to.
Yeah, my question was, are you against the Jewish law of return? Would you like to see that end?
I've thought about this before. In a hypothetical one-state solution that we're describing, I mean, I could imagine having a very generous set of immigration laws generally. I mean, in my ideal world, everyone should be able to live wherever they want. In my ideal world, like, we don't restrict immigration anywhere based on ethnicity, religion, place of birth. I understand that's a very far, utopian fantasy from the world we actually live in. But I mean, I don't believe Jews should have an exclusive right of return. But on the other hand, I think that there shouldn't be laws against restricting any kind of people, including Jews, from living anywhere. So in some level, I think, a just democratic state that's open to all in the territory of Israel and Palestine now would be one Jews would be able to move to as well. But this is all very far-fetched and hypothetical.
Well, but why is it far-fetched? I mean, having a...
Well, because the actual situation is this ongoing genocide. I mean, none of these scenarios we're outlining are remotely on the table, right? I mean, the urgent thing is to end the slaughter of the Palestinians. Okay. I mean, that's where my head is at. Everything else is very abstract and hypothetical.
Okay. You've been so generous with your time. I'm sorry if some of the...
No, these are fair questions.
I really appreciate you talking. Yeah. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.